emergency?
Yes, sir. I need an ambulance as soon as possible, sir.
Okay, sir. What's your address?
It's 100 North Carrollwood Drive, Los Angeles, California, 90077.
You said Carrollwood?
Carrollwood Drive, yes.
Okay, sir. What's the phone number you're calling from? Okay, sir. And what's the problem? Tell me exactly what happened.
Sir, we have a gentleman here that needs help, and he's not breathing yet. He's not breathing, and we're trying to pump him, but he's not
Okay.
breathing, sir.
The last hours of Michael Jackson. On June 24, 2009, at 12:21 p.m., 911 received an emergency call that would shake the world. The legendary Michael Jackson was found unconscious in his home, fighting for his life. Within seconds, the fire department arrived on scene and transported him to UCLA Medical Center. The singer was given CPR, but a mere 25 minutes after that fateful call, the infamous King of Pop was pronounced dead at the age of 50. The initial cause of death was ruled homicide. The strange circumstances surrounding his death immediately sparked questions among his devoted fans and the general public. What really happened to Michael Jackson? How did he go from being one of the most successful artists in the world to suddenly dead at the mere age of 50 under very mysterious circumstances? To better understand what truly went on during the last hours of Michael Jackson, we have to take a look at Michael's life. The life that appeared to be right in front of the public eye, but yet for some reason, it was impossible to see. The morning of June 23, 2009 started just like any other morning for Mr. Jackson. Whilst most would assume that meant another day full of glitz and glamour, Jackson's life was very different from what most people would think. It was a lot darker. It was a lot darker. The singer was an insomniac that had been in such poor health, he had to spend months on end bound to a wheelchair.
I had a difficulty with it. I had no idea of how bad it was. I mean, he would literally be unable to get any sleep at all.
He would wake up at lunchtime and immediately take a hefty dose of different painkillers before staying in bed to watch old Disney movies whilst chugging bottles of wine the entire day. But that wasn't unusual for Michael Jackson, at least not the Michael that his friends and family came to know. He had been that way for decades, so no one really questioned it. It was all about letting him be, so that's what everyone did. They let him be.
Then we knew that he had a problem. Mm-hmm. We all did. And I think a lot of people think that we were in denial.
Decades before his death, Michael Jackson was what you'd call a big shot. One of the biggest stars the world had ever seen. He was someone that people would die to get one glimpse of, waiting in line for hours at the doors of his show or lining up in front of his hotel hoping to snap a picture of the artist. But whether people actively noticed it or not, his fame started to decline in the late 1990s, which was then confirmed by him not releasing any other record after 2001.
I just owe Sony one more album. It's just a box set, really. It's with 2 new songs which I've written, and I'm leaving them, and they're very angry.
It surely didn't help at all that just as his music career started to decline, his personal image was being tainted by multiple lawsuits filed by the lawyer of a 13-year-old boy who had allegedly been abused by the singer for months on end. That was the first of several allegations made against Michael. And even though he wasn't ultimately found guilty of such allegations, the world was divided. People either believed that he was the culprit,
with Michael. When they were disappearing, they were doing all of that same sexual stuff,
or totally denied that he could ever have any involvement in anything of the sort. One of the people that spoke out against Michael about this was his former maid. She talked in detail about finding Michael in the jacuzzi with young boys and how he'd take showers with them. She said that she was too afraid to say anything because he was too powerful, and that she feared for her life if she would ever say anything on the subject. And it wasn't just her either. Everyone around Michael Jackson was in one way or another ignoring his actions, letting things go, and just fearing for their own life if they were to say or do anything that went against Michael's interests. so no one would speak up about anything, whilst others wouldn't even notice anything wrong with him. This is a common theme that seemed to follow Michael throughout his life, and ultimately had a significant role in his premature death. On June 23, 2009, Michael started his day off by waking up very late. With it, his entire schedule would have to be pushed over by a few hours, even if it was at the expense of those around him. He was late for the rehearsals of his comeback and final tour, This Is It, at the Staples Center. This tour was important to him, not only because it was the last tour he'd go on, but also for financial reasons that we will go over in a few seconds. It's safe to say that he was putting in the work to make sure that the tour would be a success, but this surely didn't come without consequences. After rehearsing for 12 hours straight that same day, he hugged all of his backup dancers and the rest of the crew goodnight, thanked them for being there for him, and went home, unbeknown to him that that's where his troubles awaited for him. Michael's biggest health problem as of late was that he couldn't sleep. No matter how much he tried, the artist could not fall asleep and get the rest that he truly needed to recover for his big comeback tour. For the past couple of decades of his life, Michael had been taking painkillers every single day. When his body got used to them and they stopped working as well as he would have liked, Mr. Jackson started adding other sedatives and drugs to his daily cocktail routine, increasing the dose little by little, so that he could finally relax enough to fall asleep. His personal physician and doctor, Dr. Conrad Robert Murray, would live with him at his multiple mansions to aid him with his medications whenever he needed it. He was the one in charge of administering the doses when Michael requested them, even if it wasn't the medication that he needed to survive. Just like his regular staff, Dr. Murray and the other doctors that were hired by Mr. Jackson were afraid to speak up about Michael's drug use, not wanting to upset the singer. His drug overuse was so bad that Michael started taking a surgical anesthetic called propofol to, quite literally, pass out so that he could get a few much-needed hours of sleep. He used to use it so much that he called the white medication milk. On a regular basis, he would call up his doctor and ask him to give him his milk so he could go to sleep. Sleep was everything for Michael, maybe because he was unable to get it on his own. This issue was so important for Michael that his long-term friend J. Randy Taraborelli said that the singer would have happily paid $1 million for a good night's sleep. Unfortunately for Michael, the only way that he was able to buy some sleep was by constantly being pumped with sedatives. On the fateful night between June 23 and June 24, 2009, Michael went to bed around midnight, trying to fall asleep to get that much-needed rest from his exhausting tour rehearsal earlier that day. He had been given a saline IV to help him rehydrate after a long day, but he couldn't relax enough to fall asleep. So he asked Dr. Murray, who was at his bedside, for a sedative. But Dr. Murray gave him 10 milligrams of Valium instead. Half an hour later, still wide awake, Michael asked Dr. Murray to give him something that would work better instead. He begged him, saying that he couldn't possibly cancel the tour, that the concerts had to happen, and that he needed to sleep to make them happen. Dr. Murray complied and injected 2 milligrams of Ativan, medication used to cure anxiety and sleep disorders, directly into his IV. An hour after that, at around 3 a.m., he added 2 milligrams of Versed to the same IV, but there were no changes in Michael's condition. He still laid there, wide awake. At 5 a.m., about 2 hours after the last dose, Dr. Murray injected another 2 milligrams of Ativan into his IV, and at 7:30 a.m., another 2 milligrams of Versed too. But even then, Michael wasn't able to sleep. According to Dr. Murray, he was right beside Michael all night, monitoring his heartbeat, and everything was normal. Michael's body was apparently used to the drugs, and because of that, there was a resistance that caused them to not work. Close to 12 hours after Michael went to bed to try and get some sleep, Dr. Murray finally gave up and administered the 25 milligrams of propofol that Michael had been begging for. He had diluted it with the local anesthetic lidocaine, since propofol on its own would cause a burning sensation through the patient's veins, and the mixture allowed it to be used without any major discomfort. At 10:40 a.m. on June 24, 2009, Michael finally dozed off and fell asleep. 10 minutes later, Dr. Murray got up from Michael's bedside and went to the bathroom, only to return 2 minutes later and find Michael unconscious on his bed, not breathing. Dr. Murray immediately began administering CPR, but when he realized it wasn't working, he yelled for the security, and at 12:20 p.m., the 911 call was made. Even though the paramedics arrived on scene a mere 3 minutes after the first call was made, and even though Michael was rushed to the hospital immediately, he did not survive. At 2:46 p.m. of that same day, he was officially pronounced dead at UCLA Medical Center. The event that most shocked the world was that his death was ruled a homicide, and the person of interest in it was Michael Jackson's personal physician, Dr. Murray. There were far too many things going on with Dr. Murray that just didn't add up. The first was the fact that he waited 82 minutes before first dialing 911, even though he had been making other calls in this time and he had his phone on. And last but not least, the fact that he was willing to give Michael the dose of heavy sedative in the first place, knowing how many other drugs were still in his system. The authorities also found evidence that Dr. Murray was not even at Michael's bedside like he claimed, monitoring Michael whilst he was unconscious. All of these elements combined led to a formal trial of Dr. Murray, which concluded with the doctor being found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years in prison.
There you hear this as the verdict was announced. The crowd here went into a huge cheer. Most of them.
The main reason behind Michael's death was ultimately the fact that he couldn't sleep when he truly needed to. But why was the King of Pop so concerned about his sleep and being able to go through with his This Is It tour? Well, because he was on the verge of bankruptcy. Throughout his life, Michael spent his money frivolously. He'd always spend an absurd $20 to $30 million above what he was actually making. So he emptied his life savings pretty quickly, and then he had to take loans out on properties he had inherited, and eventually was so broke that this goodbye tour he was working so hard towards would have been his only shot at making this money back and having enough money to live by for the remainder of his life. It was his last grab at a failing career. He thought that he would easily make it through the 50 shows and make enough money from them that he would be able to retire easily. But it was all too much for the 50-year-old who had been pumping himself up with drugs for far too long for his body to keep up with such a stressful and physically consuming schedule. Dr. Murray finally said in a statement that he did not kill Michael Jackson and that they were family who loved each other as brothers. He later revealed that Michael had his own stash of drugs, including the propofol he had nicknamed Milk, and that he believes that when he left Michael's side and went to the bathroom, the singer woke up and injected himself again using his own stash. Not knowing that he was injecting too much too fast, he caused himself to overdose on a drug that he had been taking for years. The doctor, who had been nicknamed by the media and the world Dr. Death, finally said that he did not kill Michael Jackson, but that Michael Jackson accidentally killed himself. Whether or not that's true, what truly happened that fateful night, only he and Michael will ever know. What did you think of Michael Jackson's last hours? And who would you like me to cover next? If you like this video, make sure to click on the one on the screen now.